Okay. Hi, I'm Jay Connor. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Jay.
And because of the grace of a living God, because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, because of people like you in rooms like this all over the world, I haven't found it necessary to have a drink since the 23rd of June of 1984. And for that, I am just very, very, very grateful. I'm not supposed to be here. That was not part of the plan. I learned my goal in life when I was, 6, 7 years old at St. Timothy's Catholic School in Chicago, Illinois, in the religion class. In those days, we studied a thing called the Baltimore Catechism, which is a little thin book with a bunch of questions and answers that told you everything that you needed to know about God, religion, life, And maybe the third question went like this: why did God make you? And the answer was, God made me to know Him, love Him, and serve Him in this life so that I could be happy with Him forever in the next. So that was my goal, to be happy with God forever in the next life. And I learned shortly after that there is a technical theological term for people who are happy with God forever in the next life. They're called saints. And so my mission in life was to become, are you ready? Saint J. I love how that sounds. Saint J. It's just kind of trippingly on the tongue. It's easy to say, but I found it's kind of hard, at least for me, to do. And there are a number of reasons why. The first problem that I had was the teachers and my mom and dad would say I was disobedient. I think the term that I like better is non-compliant. And people would say, well, you have to do this. And why? And they'd say, because, or even better, because I said so. And I sort of assumed that it was my job to decide, am I going to do that or not? And I'd get caught not doing it regularly, and I'd get punished. But I still, people would say, you should do this, and I'd say, why? And 70 years later, people say, you should do it. Why? And sometimes I don't get a very satisfactory answer. But anyway, the second problem that I learned it was, again, shortly after, in religion class, we came in, and the nun had all of these words on the board. And she said, today, boys and girls, we're going to learn about sin. And she said, sin is when you do something and you offend God and you have to be punished. And I thought, okay. And she said, these, in this list on the board, these are what we call mortal sins. If you do these, you offend God, and when you die, you burn forever in hell. And I thought, at 7 or 8, that sounds pretty severe. I looked at these words. I don't know what they all mean. But some of them had something to do with other people's property, other people's wives, girlfriends, things like that. And even that, they were a little bit attractive, some of it, And then a few weeks later, back in class, same nun, same board, different words, lots of words. He said, today we're going to talk about venial sins. Now these offend God, but they're not so serious. If you do these, when you die, you have to be punished, and so you have to burn. But it's not so bad, only for a few thousand years. And I'm thinking, Whew. And I'm looking at, and I knew a lot of those words. And those were, I was doing some of that. Disobeying mommy and daddy, talking back to sister, lying, cheating, stealing. I'm doing that. And here I am now. I'm like 8 years old, and it's dawned on me I am offending God, and I am going to be punished. That put a crimp in the goal, but I figured I could work my way through this thing, because I had to figure out some way that I could get close to God. And since we were a Catholic school, and since we went to church a lot, I got real active in the church. I was a choir boy, I was an altar boy, I did all this stuff. And I spent an inordinate amount of time in church. And then the third problem started to rear its head. Because I'm there in church trying as hard as I can to become close to God. And I'm sitting there and I'm kneeling in front of the altar. And I know God's on the altar. And when you're in front of God, you're supposed to be doing what? Thinking godly thoughts, right? So I'm there trying as hard as I can to think godly thoughts. And I'm doing great. And all of a sudden I start thinking about Irene Palmer or Donna Pomponio. Or Mike is really ticking me off. Or I want that. And these are not godly thoughts. And I'm looking around and I'm seeing the nuns and I'm seeing my classmates, and they're all so holy, you just want to throw up. And it dawned on me, I'm different. I'm the only one who just doesn't get it. And so now I'm in deep trouble. And so I kept trying as hard as I could to be good. But being non-compliant, still offending God, and being different, I started to feel more or less uncomfortable. And the longer I lived, the more uncomfortable I got. And I went to a Catholic all-boys high school. And I was uncomfortable. I was different from the rest of the guys. One of the things that I learned was I'm not a jock. Can't run, can't jump. Kind of hard to be a big-time jock in a big-time school when you can't do that. So I was kind of like a hanger-on. I mean, I knew everybody. It wasn't that big of a school. There were only like 400 guys in my class, but I knew everybody, and they knew me. But I was just outside of the inner circle, the neat guys, and I knew it. I knew I was different. I'd be in the locker room, and they'd be talking about stuff, and I understood what they were saying, but I couldn't understand. I would try to do what they did, and I would get totally different results. I'd get slapped. They'd get kissed. There's something wrong with this picture. And, we would do things. I would get caught. They wouldn't get caught. What's the deal? And it never dawned on me that the last person in the line of people running has a high chance of getting caught. So, but anyway, and I grew up with Irish Catholics, so I come by my alcoholism by nature. But we drank, but it was not a big deal for me. It was just something that we did, and if we weren't doing it, it was no big deal. And then when I graduated from high school, and when I went to the University of Dallas. And you have to understand, when I left for the University of Dallas, I was about my height, about 6'3", and I weighed maybe 110 pounds, wringing wet. And I mean, all of a sudden I'm in Irving, Texas, all by myself, away from home for the first time in my life. And I'm a scared boy. I am really scared. And I got to school about a day early accidentally. And all of the guys who were in the dorm were they were the counselors, they were the some teachers, they were the upperclassmen, and these guys, they were men. A lot of them were war veterans, and I'm a 18-year-old scared kid. And that night they said, "We're going out for a beer, kid. You want to come along?" I said, "Sure." And I had a beer before, so we go to this dive, and we're drinking beer, and I'm about 3-4 swallows into a schooner of beer, and all of a sudden, bam! I am hip, slick. I'm cool. I am a man among men. I'm not the leader of the pack. He's over there. But he better watch out because the kid is in town. I mean, I couldn't believe what happened. It was fantastic. And I liked it. I learned a couple of things that night. The first thing I learned is I can drink a lot of beer. The second thing I learned is there's a price you pay for drinking a lot of beer. And I did, Went back to the dorm, did all the stuff you're supposed to do. Threw up, took some aspirin, kind of fitfully went to sleep, woke up, threw up, took some aspirin, drank a Coke, had some breakfast, and went about my business. And that night, they're coming through again. They said, "Do you want to come again, kid?" "You betcha." Went back, same dive, another schooner of beer. Same thing happened. 2-3 swallows in it. Boom, it hit. And I like that. And for the next 22 years, every opportunity I had to drink, I took it. Because it made me feel, for the first time in my life, I was okay. I could talk to girls. I didn't get slapped. Occasionally even got kissed. I felt, I felt okay. And I knew I could deal with anything. And the only unfortunate thing is that every time that I got an opportunity to feel okay, somehow or another, and I can't explain it, I over-medicated, and I would end up doing things that I really didn't want to do, and things that I didn't feel comfortable doing, but and the only thing I could say is that they seemed like a really good idea at the time. And looking back, the good news, I never was out drinking with bank robbers or serious drug dealers or anything like that, because if we were out, somebody said, "Hey, let's go rob a bank." I don't know, man. It seemed like a good idea at the time because I ended up saying, "Let's go to Matamoros." Okay, what are you going to do in Matamoros? Beats the shit out of me, but it sounds like a fun thing to do. And and I couldn't explain it because I have no desire to go to Matamoros. I have no idea where the hell Matamoros is. And even after I've been to Matamoros, I sure don't know why the hell I would want to go back there again. But when I'm feeling okay, these things that seem like sensible things, and afterwards you go, "Ooh, I can't believe I did that." The good news about, at least for me, about drinking was I did get into a lot of trouble drinking, but there was an awful lot of trouble that was just right there waiting for me, and I was ready to do it, but I had needed another drink, and so I'm drinking another drink because the people that I'm going to get into trouble with, a lot of times they hadn't finished their drink, so I got another drink, and the next thing I know, I'm sitting there drinking by myself. So I hope that, when the time comes that I get points for not doing things that I wanted to do because they got tired and left me behind. But but the more the longer I went, the more trouble I got in, and suddenly my drinking, JR's drinking, became a big topic of conversation at the Connor household. And it became a big topic of conversation in my own mind, because I'm doing things on both of those lists. I'm offending God pretty severely. And when I'm not drinking, I'm looking at all of the people around me, and I'm definitely different. They have their act together, and I have no idea where it is, much less how I can get it together. And I had to do something. So I, one summer, decided I was going to sell encyclopedias door to door in West Texas, which sounded like a really good idea. And unfortunately, we were out selling encyclopedias in one city or another city, and sometimes we left and didn't pay the hotel bill. And all of a sudden, I find out that I have like an APB out on my car, which was my father's car. And he called me and told me. And the police were looking for me all over Texas. And I decided, well, I'm going to have to do something. And I didn't know what to do. And so I thought, and I kind of thought about what I was thinking about doing when I was a kid. My goal is to do whatever I could to get close to God. And I thought, okay, if I can get back, my family had then moved to Wisconsin. If I can get back to Wisconsin without getting arrested, I will give my life to God. And that will take care of the problem. And I got a sign from God. I made it all the way to Marshfield, Wisconsin. No cops. Hell of a deal. And I called, I talked to one of the priests and said, I decided I want to be a priest. And he said, fine. Come to La Crosse. And suddenly I am in the seminary of the Sacred Heart in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And I got to wear, I was a junior in college, I got to wear a cassock and a collar, and I looked like a priest. And I'd stand in the mirror and I'd look and I'd say, God, you look holy. Wow. And I figured, okay, now it's going to be different. And unfortunately, my character defects came out. First thing they said is, you can't leave the grounds of the seminary. I don't know, 10 acres right on the Wisconsin river, and it was beautiful. Right across the street was a bar. And when the lights went out, very often, J.R. the seminarian in mufti would sneak across the street to the bar. And I tended bar there, entertained there. I had a good time there. And I'd come back, when you're supposed to be back in the seminary at 10 o'clock. Well, when you're going to get back at 5 after 10, screw this, I'm coming back at midnight, because if I'm going to get caught doing something, I'm going to get caught doing something as opposed to just pussyfooting around, right? So I'd get, and they drove me crazy. They would never say anything. They wouldn't even give me the look. And now I'm guilty because I'm guilty, and I know I'm not pulling the wool over anybody's eyes, and I'm in trouble. And and I think God looked down and decided, do I need another alcoholic priest? and he said, nah. And so, circumstances really totally out of my control. I embarrassed myself terribly in front of the bishop on a Sunday Mass. And the next day was Monday, and I got called to the rector's office and informed that the faculty had a meeting to decide what they were going to do with the seniors when they graduated. I was a senior. But he said, but the first order of business was, what are we going to do about Jay Connor? And he said, we took a vote. and I want to give you an opportunity to make it unanimous that you leave the seminary at the end of the semester. And I said, okay. And he said, because you are a bad influence in the seminary. And he said, I'm a bad influence on one of the seminary, Cliff Hibbs. Well, I was there with Cliff, and Cliff was told he was the worst influence in the seminary. So when you're a bad influence on that, so I said, okay, I'll go, I'll leave. And I went back home, and I went back to college, and I graduated and got a degree. And I decided, okay, now it's going to be different. Now I'm going to do something to make something of myself. And I enlisted in the Army. And I went to officer candidate school. And I'm here to tell you that 51 years ago, exactly to today, I was commissioned the second lieutenant in the United States Army. And I was an officer and a gentleman by proclamation of the President and an act of Congress. And everyone thought it was going to take an act of God. And so there I was. Now I'm going to be okay. And unfortunately, I was different from all these other people. And so I would have a drink. And again, every time I have a drink, the same thing happened. And then I met this beautiful woman, and I asked her to marry me. And now it's going to be different. We got married and went to Germany. And all of a sudden, drinking became a topic of nightly conversation in the Connor household in Germany. And then I'm going to leave the Army, and now I'm going to go, and I'm going to go to graduate school and get a graduate degree, and now I'm going to be okay. And they have bars right next to the law school. And then I took a job in Houston, Texas. Now I have a kid on the way. I have a job. I have a house. I have a car. I've got all these responsibilities, and I have a professional designation. And they have a bar in the basement of One Shell Plaza. And it opened at 11:45. And I was there at 11:45, just so I could meet my clients and I could talk to them and all that. And then drinking became a topic of conversation with Shell Oil Company. And I had an opportunity to resign and to find another profession, which I did. And every time I'm doing this, it's going to be different. It's going to be okay. If I. Well, one day I came into the bedroom of our house, and my wife is sitting on the bed, rocking back and forth, crying, and she said, "I can't take this anymore. You're killing us." And I didn't want to hurt her. I never meant to hurt anybody. All I wanted to do was to feel okay. That's all I ever wanted to do. And so I decided I'm going to have to do something about my drinking. And I couldn't stop it. I tried as hard as I could. I couldn't stop it. And I talked to somebody, and she said, "Well, why don't you go to Alcoholics Anonymous? They have a solution for this thing." So I said, okay. So I called Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got this guy on the phone. It was a Sunday night. And I have a scotch in my hand, and I'm talking to this guy in Alcoholics Anonymous. He says, "You want me to come and help you?" I said, "No, I'm fine. And he told me where I could go to a meeting the next day. So I went to the meeting, and I got lost there. So I got to the meeting late. And I walked in there, and I'm looking around, and I'm listening to these people. And it was clear to me that these people had a problem. One guy was talking about he was working on one of those tree cutting crews, and Friday night they get into the back of the truck, and the foreman hands back a 6-pack of beer, and he has 2 beers. And the next thing he knows, he's kind of fallen down under a bridge next to his house. He's lost his 10-speed bicycle, and I'm thinking, you have a problem. Whoa. And then at the end of the meeting, they called on their guru, and he was talking, and it all of a sudden dawned on me, this son of a bitch, he was in prison. I'm not talking about jail or a lot. He was in prison for something serious. And I found out later he also had a pistol in his boot. But then they said something about not drinking. And I walked out of that and I thought, I don't think I want to hang around with these people. But this not drinking thing, I'm going to try that. I'm going to, if they can do it, I can do it. So I decided I was going to not drink. And I'm here to tell you, it was a piece of cake not drinking. The secret is this. When I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is, I'm not going to drink. And I got to take that thought, and I got to plaster it right in the front of my brain, and I have to keep it there all day long. And I did that. And I could, doing that, didn't drink for 27 and a half consecutive days. And looking back on the 27 and a half consecutive days, everyone around me was miserable. And I was beyond miserable. Anyway, so I was out for lunch with a guy, and we went to one of the downtown clubs, and I'd never been in there before. The waiter comes up and he says to this guy, would you like a drink? And the guy says, yeah, I'd take a vodka martini. And the guy looks at me and he says, and a gin martini for you? How did he know I was thinking that? And I took it, this is like the voice of God. And it was a test. So I said, yes, I'll have one gin martini. And I decided this is the test to see is Jay an alcoholic. Because, alcoholics, they can't have one drink. They just, boom. And so I'm having I look up and this guy comes, and I knew I made a mistake because he's got this little dinky ass glass. I mean, tiny glass, and he put 2 olives in it, and he's. So okay, but this is my experiment, God. So I start sipping this martini, and it was almost like an out-of-body experience because I could watch me drinking like a gentleman this martini. And I'm drinking this one martini. And I'm not going to have more than one martini because if I have more than one martini, I'm an alcoholic. And I don't want to be an alcoholic because I'm going to end up with those losers at the ratty-ass club. And I didn't have another drink. And I went back to the office and I thought, I have passed the test. I am not an alcoholic. Now this is good news for Jay. So I hopped in my car, drove home to share with my wife the good news that I am not an alcoholic. And I go in the door and Chris is sitting in the kitchen talking to a friend and she says, what are you doing home? I said, I have really good news. And she says, what's that? I said, wait a second. And I went to the liquor locker and I pulled out the bottle of scotch and 3 glasses, because there were 3 people there, put ice in them and made drink for it. What are we celebrating? I went, I'm not an alcoholic. And I got drunk. And I could not, after that day, I could not drink for a day. I couldn't do it. And it finally got to the point where my wife said to me, look, you do what you're going to do. We want no part of it. We're going to do what we have to do. We're going to have dinner at 5 or 6. If you're there, fine. If not, fine. You want to go out and drink? You want to go out and carouse? God love you, go do it. We got no part of it. Which bothered me. But all of a sudden, I don't have anyone to prove anything to. Now I've got to do something about my drinking because I'm losing my wife, I'm losing my kids, my job is hanging just by a thread, my health is shot. I don't know what to do. And I don't know how many weeks or months. And one Thursday I got a phone call, and it was the guy that I called when I first called Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Fine." He said, "Are you drinking?" I said, "Yeah, but I have it under control." And he said, "You keep this shit up and you're going to get drunk." And that was 4 o'clock on Thursday. And Friday, I went downtown, and I had a very successful Friday. I made a sale, made some money, and I had stopped at the bar in the basement of Shell, had a couple of pops, went back to the office, got everything cleaned up, called my wife, said I'm going to leave in a few minutes, and I stopped at a titty bar near my office to have a drink to face the traffic on my way home. And I told my wife I'm going to be home for dinner at 6 o'clock. And I got into the whorehouse at like 4:30. And the next thing I know, it's like 9:30, and Jay is sitting in the whorehouse, drunk. And I didn't want to be. And it dawned on me, when you get drunk after a person in Alcoholics Anonymous says you're going to get drunk, that is a bad sign. And so I called him, I called my wife, I called my folks, I called my aunt, and I said, I'm probably an alcoholic. And the next day, Saturday, I drove around Houston, and I'm thinking, I may have overreacted. and so I didn't know it at the time. I took an inventory of my drinking through my whole life. And I'm looking for a loophole, something that I can hold on to so I don't have to be with the people whose leaders are jailbirds, And they're not my kind of people. And I drove around, and I could come up with one time in my life where I had one drink. And the more I thought about it, what happened was, and I don't remember whether I was sick with the flu or I was hungover from the night, but I don't remember. But I was in this dive that had peanut shells on the floor, bullet holes in the wall. I mean, and the only people in there were rednecks, there were Mexicans, and there were college students, and that was it. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting at the bar, and you know how it is when you know you're about to throw up. And I looked, and I didn't think I could make it to the John. And I knew if I didn't make it to the John, that I was going to barf possibly on some of these people. And I knew they had guns, so that wasn't a safe thing. So I ran out the front door, and I made it to the parking lot and threw up. And then I looked, and there was this big mirror, and or big window, they could see me. And so I was afraid to go back into the place. So I went back to school, and I thought, that didn't seem like a big enough loophole. So I said, okay, and I was this guy wanted me to meet a guy named Gene in the Woodlands on Sunday. So I said, okay. So I went to meet this guy. And, you know what the conversation's going to be. I've had this conversation, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 times. What's wrong with you? Why did you? But I said I would do it. I said, what the hell? So I went. And the guy shocked the hell out of me. He didn't wave his finger at me. He didn't even ask me about my drinking. He said, well, you want to quit drinking? And I said, yeah. And then he started telling me about his drinking. And I thought, oh. And I could relate to some of his drinking. And then we started to have a conversation. And when I thought I was going to be talking to this guy for like half an hour, and he kicked my ass out. I'm there 3-4 hours later talking, and I was telling him, look, I have this problem with drinking. Every time I drink, I get drunk, I get into trouble, I'm losing my wife, I'm losing my kids, I'm losing my job. But if I don't drink, I get crazy. And he said to me, you might be alcoholic. You might have a disease that we call alcoholism. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, it's a disease. And it's not your fault that you got it. Now, it's your fault that you drink it, but it's not your fault that you have an alcoholism. But it's a disease, and we have a solution. And I said, okay, what do I have to do? He says, well, the first thing is, he said, you've got 2 or 3 degrees, so you're pretty educated. I said, yeah. He says, okay, I want you to call me. And he says, because you're special. I want you to call me 3 times a day. You know, I thought, okay, I can do that. And you know, it was a year later I found out that wasn't nice. But and he said, okay, and I want you to say a prayer at night, you know, and before you go to bed, I want you to kneel down and say, God, help me not to drink today or tomorrow. And then when I wake up, got it backwards. In the morning you wake up, you say, God, help me not to drink today. At night, you kneel down and say, God, thank you for keeping me sober today. I said, I can do that. He said, okay. Then we're going to go to meetings, and I want you to be at the meeting before the meeting. I want you to be at the meeting, and you're going to be at the meeting after the meeting. I said, okay. And then I'll give you some stuff to do. I said, fine. And so off we went. And I started calling him 3 times a day. And I started going to meetings, and I did all that stuff. And, you know, initially, I expected everyone to say, wow, Jay is at Alcoholics Anonymous. He's not drinking. That's wonderful. I was at a party, and this woman, she literally followed me around. I mean, it was like she was attached to me at the hip. You know, don't drink that. Don't drink that. And I wanted to smack her, you know. And but my wife would say, well, you know, where were you? And I said, I was at a meeting. Oh, it's 11:30. And I said, well, and she says, you've been drinking? I said, no. Well, coffee, yes. And she didn't trust me. And stuff would happen. I remember one day I came in, and my wife just turned and screamed at me. And I didn't know what to do. And my sponsor had told me that I couldn't tell her who she was and what she should do. That I lost that right. I thought, oh. So I ran right past the wife and kids into the bedroom, picked up the phone, and this was in the ancient ages. This was dial phone or a push button phone, and I called Gene, and I said, Gene, she's hollering at me. He says, what did you do? I said, I didn't do anything. I came in the door and she's hollering at me. He says, what did you do when I came in the door? I said hi, and she's hollering at me. Gene, what do I do? He said, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go back. I want you to go back, walk out, come back in, walk up to your wife, give her a hug, give her a kiss, say, honey, how was your day? Can I help you? I said, okay, I can do that. And so I did it, and find out that she's hollering at me because she'd had a terrible day. The kids were, had problems. One of them was hurt. And when I did that, all of a sudden we had a quiet night. And I could help her. I wish I could say every night I came home and did the same thing, but a number of nights I came, Jane, she's hollering at me. But I had to talk to people at the meetings and after the meetings. And in talking to the people and talking to y'all, you taught me about me. One day I was talking, this guy came up and he said, you got a minute? I said, sure. And he said, let's go have some coffee. And he said, I have a problem with anger, and I wanted to talk to you about it. I have no idea why he's talking to me, because I'm not an angry person. And so he told me what he had said to his wife. And I'm sitting there listening and thinking, boy, that's dumb. That's really dumb. You're going to get, do that, you get into trouble. When I said that same thing to Chris, I got my ass. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, I got anger issues. And I learn about me not by thinking about me. I learn about me by talking to y'all. My sponsor had me do things. I had to make coffee. I had to clean ashtrays. I had to sweep floors. I had to move furniture. And every once in a while I had to go to somebody's house and I'd have to go clean toilets or clean kitchens, and the other people with me, they got to talk to the alcoholic. And I said, how come I don't? And they said, because you don't have anything to say. I thought that hurt. But I had to do it. And whenever I have a problem, I'd say, Gene, why do I have to do this? Because otherwise you're going to drink. Well, I don't want to drink. And so, time would pass. And all of a sudden, it came time to do the steps. And it was funny, I went to my original home group was the Serenity Club in the Woodlands, and I fell in with a bunch of activists. We started the Spirit of Houston conference. We started a conference up in Montgomery County. We had a thing for a number of years called First Friday, and we would bring speakers in from all over the country to talk. And so I got to meet all sorts of people in AA from all over the country. And it seemed like the first year and a half, they beat us over the head with the first and the second step. That I have to acknowledge in my innermost core, my being, that I am an alcoholic. And what does that mean? And what it means is that if I drink, I have no idea what's going to happen. Because I am absolutely powerless over alcohol. Any alcohol in me, and Katie barred the door. And then there's the dash. My life's unmanageable, which means that the stuff is going on that I get, as the doctor says, nervous, irritable, and discontent, and then I have to drink. So I'm between the rock and the hard place. And then the second step, that I need some power greater than myself to restore me to sanity. That's a serious admission against interest. It means I'm crazy. And when I'm thinking my thoughts by myself, they are sometimes way out there. And I know that because I've been sitting at meetings with people who are certifiably insane, and they'll say something, and you watch at some of these meetings, the old timers are going, because it makes sense to us, But the thing is I learned from taking the actions in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, being of service to other people. I learned a whole bunch of stuff. But the biggest thing that happened was, all of a sudden I find I have a relationship with a God who loves me, regardless of the fact that I have offended him, am offending him, and will offend him. And it's not my job to become St. J. It's not my job to become loved by God. It's my job to just let him love me and then do what's in front of me. And I think we are so fortunate to be in Alcoholics Anonymous, because here they beat you over the head. Sometimes they kind of sneak up on you, and they make us be of service to other people. And when I'm serving other people, and sometimes the service is somebody says, you got a minute to talk? And I say, yeah. And then they give me their tale of woe, And I sit and listen to their tale of woe. What happens? I'm not thinking about what's going on with Jay. I'm thinking about, is there anything I can share with you to help? And when I do that, I start to change. And over the years, we keep doing this stuff one day at a time, and we change. And then we change really in many good ways. And the other thing about this program that's neat, and we read in how it works, we practice progress, not perfection. And this is the only place I've ever been where somebody says, well, okay, why don't you screwed that up, why don't you start the day over again? I didn't know you could do that. But they taught me I can do that here. And they taught me all these things, and I have become almost a halfway decent citizen. And that woman who was walking out the door, in 6 months, we will celebrate 50 years of marriage. And my kids, who they really never saw me drinking, my kids love me. And you know, we get along very well. And it was all gone until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. It was all gone until I gave myself to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, to y'all, and to God. And I am so grateful that I did that. Thank you very much.